Welcome everyone to our February webinar. My name is Matt Del Bono and I'm an Extension Support Specialist here with the GLASE Consortium. And today we have an exciting talk titled Lessons Learned and Opportunities Ahead in CEA between Chris Higgins, President and Co-Founder of Hort Americas, and our very own GLASE Executive Director, Gretchen Schimmelpfennig. And so before we get started, I want to welcome you all here today with a very brief introduction to the GLASE Consortium. So for those of you who are not familiar, GLASE stands for the Greenhouse Lighting and Systems Engineering Consortium, and we're out of Cornell University. And our mission is to transform greenhouse lighting and systems management to support climate-smart CEA. And we do so by conducting research, educating growers, and in the hopes that emerging technologies can be adopted faster to help save growers money and reduce the environmental impact of energy use in greenhouses. And so the three main ways that we support our members are through research. As I mentioned, our research is focused on greenhouses, but also includes indoor agriculture, and we seek to facilitate technology transfer by showcasing results on plants. We also have a variety of education initiatives, so we provide webinars, technical articles, short courses, and other workforce development initiatives for our members. And then networking. Our membership values our networking benefits, which include things like our GLASE Industry Advisory Board, as well as our annual summit. And so briefly, I want to take a moment to call out a new resource, which is the GLASE Library. The GLASE Library is a central place where you can access past webinars and other resources. And we also have our previous short courses available for purchase for non-GLASE members. So we encourage you to check that out and bookmark the link that's on this page. Our members are very valued, and we hope that you are potentially interested in joining GLASE. And I'll just share briefly that if you are interested in learning more, we encourage you to contact our team for additional information on our various membership categories and benefits. And then lastly, I want to mention and highlight a new membership initiative called Vivid Canopy, where folks working in the CEA industry can connect and organizations can showcase how they're leading by example and hiring a more diverse workforce in CEA. And our next event is actually in just a couple of weeks. We will be hosting a Vivid Canopy panel and roundtable discussion at Indoor AgCon on March 11th. Our theme for that event is a diverse workforce in action, and so we certainly hope to see you there. Okay, and with all that being said, we can switch gears here. I'll briefly reintroduce our speakers for anyone who just joined. We are thrilled to welcome Chris Higgins, who is the president and co-founder of Hort Americas and a valued member of our industry advisory board. And we also have Gretchen Schimmelpfennig, who is the GLASE executive director and a senior energy engineer at Energy Resources Integration. And so with all that being said, Gretchen, maybe I'll hand things over to you to say hello to our attendees and take it from there.
Sure. So welcome to our first webinar of 2025. We're really glad to have Chris return for another webinar where we're really discussing a lot of the things that happened in the past year and some ways that organizations are valuing quality, resiliency, and looking towards the future, how people are going to adapt in the latest market changes. So I'm pleased to introduce Chris Higgins. He's been with us for several years. Hort Americas is a valued GLASE IAB member. And on the screen, we're just going to keep these images on the screen this whole time today. You can access Hort Americas resources and also visit the GLASE library if you have more interest to learn more about either organization. But as Matt said, I'm the executive director of GLASE. I've been with GLASE since 2023, and I'm really excited for us to continue to advance emerging technology, as well as continue to save growers money as we educate the market and explore the challenges and how the industry can adopt solutions. So all of that said, as Matt's been saying, Chris, thanks for joining GLASE for another discussion. And I invite you to reintroduce yourself to our viewers and tell them a bit more about what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me. It's always a pleasure. As Ben said, I'm president and co-founder of Hort Americas. Hort Americas, we're a company that we like to say we specialize in the controlled environment ag sector. We are kind of a marketing company. We are kind of a distribution company. We do a lot of work with lighting. That's why we're a member of GLASE. We do a lot of work with nutrients, substrates, and then a variety of cropping accessories that growers use to grow a variety of controlled environment ag crops, including some floriculture crops like orchids and other young plants. Yeah, we've been around since 2008. I'm proud to say that we're now international, meaning that we have an office in Quebec as well as an office in Hermosillo, Mexico, and we're doing our best to support the North American industry.
So, why does Hort Americas play in the greenhouse and indoor farming space? I know a lot of companies have a kind of motivation. So, what's the motivation for working in the U.S. greenhouse industry?
Yeah, I guess well, since I'm one of the founders, the motivation was more personal than anything. It's kind of one of those things where you find yourself in a career that you maybe didn't design, but you continuously found interest in as you grew within your career. So coming out of college, it wasn't a matter of I knew what I wanted to do. It was I was taking advantage of opportunities from people that I know. Um, and it landed me in the commercial horticulture industry. Um, as a young 20-year-old man, not owning a house, I found myself working in floriculture and not having a tremendous amount of interest in bedding plants. I love the challenge of the science behind growing something, coming from a family that is all involved in either commercial horticulture or agriculture. I love the science behind the growing stuff, but the crop wasn't as interesting as it was to me when I found food production in those same environments. And so one thing led to another. And originally in the mid 2000s, my goal was to develop a business that would help family farms be able to farm profitably again. Because at that point in time, field farming was under a lot of pressure to either get really big or kind of go out of business. And that really I started seeing that personally in the late 80s and early 90s. Finally, by the mid 2000s, I was in a place where I could try to do something about that. And that was our original inspiration was, okay, you're a family farm, you want to expand and build more income on the land you already owned. We were trying to help individuals do that. Fast forward now 15, 16 years, and it's kind of funny. I think many people on this call might find themselves in that same predicament of needing to grow, needing to expand, talking about mergers and consolidations in order to be competitive in the landscape. So yeah, things have definitely changed, but in some ways things are still very much the same.
Thanks for sharing that background. And for those of you who don't know Hort Americas, we're really glad to feature them as a partner of GLASE and hope to explore maybe if you haven't seen our last webinar with Chris, Matt can share a link in the chat and hopefully you can catch up and see what we've learned since last year. So essentially, it's been about 1 year since our last webinar.
Yeah.
So we were exploring last year what quality means in the horticultural lighting landscape. I want to touch on an article you recently wrote about comparing kind of the end of life or failure issue warranty stuff in the market. We can touch on that. But maybe in general, how is today's greenhouse industry refocusing on sustainable growth and operational consistency? Let's start there.
Yeah, I don't know if in the last year, I don't know if there's been much that has changed in terms of sustainable growth or operational efficiency. What I would say is that our world and how we're financed continues to change. And because of the way we're financed, we're probably more focused now on operational excellence and less so on aspirational growth than what we were a year ago. And I'm more comfortable in saying definitely 2 or 3 years ago, right? I know that we just can't kind of continue to lean towards that operational excellence side, needing to show our financial backers, whether that's traditional financial institutes or investors, that we can run these businesses with positive EBITDA and a positive return on investment. So I don't know if we've really changed in terms of what we've done over the last year. I would just say there's more and more emphasis on being profitable.
Yeah, I would say that in the past few years of attending industry conferences, I noted in the kind of early years in maybe 2020, 2021, there was a lot of that big dreams, big claims. I think I saw recently an investment chart showing the amount of venture capital that was injected into the industry in 2021 compared to more recent years. And so I saw over recent years as well in the conversations shifted to unit economics.
Yeah.
And so would you say that environmental sustainability is still a part of the discussion?
I'm going to say it depends on where you're located at. And I'm going to say it depends on what sort of farm you have. I think it is still parts of some discussions, but I think those discussions are the minority. I think depending on what country you come from, some of those conversations are being forced through different forms of legislation. Um, but if I were to speak in general in the United States, we have not, let's just be honest about where we are at as an industry. We really have not had any new projects built in the last 2 years, right? We've had projects that are being finalized or projects are in certain phases of construction, but there's really not many, and I don't want to say any, but there's not many new projects that are being constructed. So a lot of those conversations, at least with my level, about sustainability or environmental initiatives, they usually occur at the front side of the project development. And because we haven't had a lot of new projects developed over the last couple of years, I would say that that conversation isn't being had as frequently. And I think the reason you find more and more conversations towards unit economics or through operational excellence is in fact because we're now responsible for the farms that we built 3, 4, 5 years ago. And those aspirational achievements that we talked about really from my world starting in about 2010 through 2015 that were then developed and found themselves operational by by 2019, 21 to 22, those farms were now either being, they're either being shuttered or they're being forced to perform at a profit. But we don't, it's kind of like, okay, we believed all your dreams. Now go prove to us that your ideas were right.
Yeah. And so on the concept of operational excellence, do you feel like energy efficiency is then what companies are leaning into with these existing facilities in order to turn them profitable, or are there other levers that they're pulling?
I would say it's one of the top three, but I'm not going to say it's the top lever. I would say probably number one lever is labor. I would say that's been more of a challenge, let's say, than the energy efficiency. Hopefully, if the farm was designed correctly, that they're achieving the goals that they set forth. I would say number one is labor. Number two is probably sales related conversations, right? Like how do we sell this farm out, and how do we sell this farm out at the right price? Um, then you get into some conversations about farm level profitability and what does that mean. So in that conversation, if they're talking about farm level profitability, and you look at a balance sheet, you're probably going to see labor number one, and depending on the location and the type of farm it is, utilities are going to be right there in that top two or three, right? And so if you find yourself in an area that you don't have the right energy contract, or you're in an area that requires a lot of utilities to either light, heat, or cool your facility, you will find that conversation elevating and continuing to escalate. But again, I think the primary conversation that I'm around is labor.
Great. I mean, I think that on the GLASE side, energy efficiency is a core part of our focus, but also automation can be a part of the emerging technology buckets that we're looking at. So I know that there was a big kind of dream of technology saving the industry as this new wave. Do you feel like automation technology, that there is an opportunity for that to breed more operational excellence, or is that potentially something that seems like a good promise, but maybe is more high cost than folks are ready to take on in 2025?
I think it depends on how you define automation. I know that the big projects that we hear about, we look at automations like fully robotic or something that's like all in, right? Where I see technology currently being useful is in the labor assist category, where you are using technology, but that technology is much more affordable. And then using an example that I'm very knowledgeable about, one of the examples, like we're looking at the photo online, is a tomato greenhouse, right? And so that vine is clipped to a twine. And the way we traditionally do that is we take a plastic clip and we clip it to a twine, and we do that so many times throughout the cropping cycle. There are now machines out that these same workers carry with them and use the machine to clip and attach faster. Now, they can do many more vines per hour than what they can do by hand. When I think of automation today, the automation that I feel is useful, it's that sort of labor assist technology that takes skilled workers, which has been something that I have been talking about a lot lately, is that the misnomer that the people in the crop are unskilled is a big fallacy, that these are very skilled workers. The reality is that our access to younger skilled workers is diminishing. So we have more skilled workers who are aging, and finding technology that allows those aging skilled professionals to be more effective, more efficient, and take less of a toll on their body, I think is really that first step in using technology to address a pain point that operators have in finding enough skilled and talented labor to operate their crop. Yeah, that's where I think those are real life situations that we're seeing success with. I think if you go so far that you're building a new growing system, and then you're building a new growing system to work around your technology, then I think that's where we're seeing the most challenges, because now you're not only learning how to run a new growing system, you're having to train your labor to that growing system. That labor needs a certain amount of crop cycles before they're comfortable and confident in growing and producing high yields. So now you're solving a whole bunch of problems at once. And the technology that I see being most successful is the ones that are using more traditional growing systems and solving individual problems one at a time.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. The solving one problem at a time is, I think sometimes folks think that, okay, well then I'd have to have 8 systems to solve 8 problems. But however, that does allow you to do a bit more of a tweak and peak approach where you can, okay, let me tweak this one problem, take a look. How has that impacted the business? Okay, do I need to tackle that second problem? And so these turnkey automated systems of completely roboticized farming is maybe not where I think a lot of us are going like this year. And so
Yeah,
I appreciate you mentioning the, what was it that you said? It was the labor assist form of automation,
yeah,
um, as well as some of the more low cost automation. I've been doing an emerging technology study in California on smart controls and energy monitoring for CEA, and we kind of ranked different tiers of automation. And I think that the industry, as it communicates with growers, as well as it sells products, I think needs to be a bit more clear about the levels that we're talking about. Are we talking about the ability to schedule? Are we talking about something sensor-based control? Are we talking about something that has AI, our favorite words? Um, and so I wanted to bring our conversation to the consumer a little bit. And so as the landscape is focusing on operational excellence, do you feel like the produce prices for CEA on the shelf are going to change, up, down, stay the same? Like, what are your thoughts on how maybe automation or how these interests in increasing profitability of farms is going to affect the consumer?
well, I don't know if we're going to be able to, when we look at ourselves as consumers of fresh produce that's coming from the CEA market, let's be real about what we're talking about and admit that the majority of the crops coming from a CEA environment are coming from outside of the United States, right? So whether that's coming from Southern Ontario and Canada, or it's coming from Mexico, those are both areas, regions that are producing high volumes of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and other crops that are, for the most part, being shipped into the United States. So we have some other pressures that are going to impact what I'm saying right now in the forms of tariffs, that no matter what we do, there's going to be an impact. And then on the US side, farmers that are trying to fill the void that might be created by higher cost produce, we also might find ourselves in a situation where we're not able to source enough labor currently. So we might be paying more for the labor that we currently have, thereby not being able to make up that gap. So I don't want to be in a position where I predict in the next 6 to 12 months a decrease in product on the shelf, in terms of the price on the product on the shelf. But I do think as we work forward and we look maybe 2 or 4 years out, it might not be that the price on the shelf goes down, but it definitely puts it in a position where you can stabilize the pricing because it's more predictable if the systems are working correctly. And if the systems are working correctly, then we shouldn't see the impact of pestilence outside, the impact of fires, the impact of drought, and other natural climate change, things that impact yield and availability coming from the field. So if it's working well, and then also I'm only talking about maybe 5 or 6 products, right? We're talking tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, to some degree strawberries and leafy greens and culinary herbs. Outside of that, we're really not talking about much of anything. And I guess I should say eggplant as well, because we do have some eggplants on the shelves from the greenhouse.
I appreciate you mentioning the unpredictability. Nobody can really tell the future, but I think that it's worth exploring, like we were seeking to do today, exploring how the landscape might be changing in the next year, and appreciating that these products could essentially have a ceiling price for the consumer in which they might not pay more than a certain price. Wouldn't you agree, Chris?
Yeah, well, yes and no.
I mean,
And
I did just see the $19 Erewhon strawberry, so I guess there
yeah,
is maybe a ceiling for some. That's
so, and let's remember that we are all in for-profit businesses, right? And I'm not trying to tell anybody how to run their business, but we're in an industry that has a tendency to work and really show examples of supply and demand, right? So when when there's pressure on supply, our prices have a tendency to go up, and farmers have a tendency to make money when they can. So there's a lot of things that could go into this. I don't necessarily see American producers lowering their price if they can make a couple extra bucks. So again, maybe consistency so we see less volatility in pricing, but I'm not going to say that it would be
going.
going down.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a fair prediction to make. So let's talk a bit more about technology. You wrote recently that we need to spend and invest like farmers. What did you
Yeah.
really mean by that, Chris?
So I think through what I refer to as the ag tech bubble, I think we were spending and investing as tech companies. And I think that that's okay if the businesses we were creating were tech businesses. And I think we got confused about what we were creating. And what I mean by that is we spent a lot of money developing technology for internal use, but the way we were going to financially benefit from that was through the sales of low margin produce, right? So if we put a whole bunch of money in developing AI, and then we expect AI to be paid for through the sale of lettuce, then I think we have a little bit of a problem with our model, right? And that's kind of what I meant by that, is if we think like farmers and go back to, solving specific problems, if we think like farmers, we're probably going to be a little bit more frugal. We're probably going to pay closer attention to how we're hiring, what positions we're hiring for, and we're probably going to look at paying a lot more attention to the units that we're selling and finding ways to make those units profitable, and probably buying the tech from another party, right? Not having to develop all the tech ourselves, and relying on other parties to buy tech that we find reliable, durable, and repairable.
Yeah, I think that another thing you mentioned in that discussion was that farmers also need proof.
Yeah.
They want to see the value in their investments before they dive in further, and I think that also was an aspect that I appreciated.
Yeah, and that one's that one's tough, especially if you look at what we're doing, with Glaze as an example. Um, we need funding to prove that the products are going to work first, and who is the person that should who is the voice that the farmers should listen to that proves when something works or something doesn't, especially in an environment where, a greenhouse essentially has 9 variables that you're trying to manage. And if we're using glaze as an example, we're often talking about light. That's only one of 9 variables. So we can do all the work we want to with light, but if we're not watching temperature and humidity, and it could be air temperature versus leaf temperature, if we're not watching those things and we only report light, then it's unlikely that the farmer's going to have success. So how do we find a way where we're giving the farmers access to information that has been thoroughly vetted so that they know they're making a good investment? And I think there's certain technologies we're definitely getting there just through the course of time. But some of the newer technologies still have some ways to go.
For sure. And in your discussions on this as well, you said like it won't lead to success if we have farms bear the full weight of either launching a technology or teaching technologies companies how to design and use their products.
Yeah, and then paying for it.
Yeah, and that hit me hard because it's, I work a lot with commercial growers, and the entities that they want to see support the technology adoption include folks like academia here at Cornell, governments, entities like, the New York State Energy and Research and Development Authority, for example, as well as like state governments like departments of agriculture, which I feel like in this current landscape are going to need to really step up at the state level to provide the research for the funding for their local universities and local growers. So I appreciate that that
I think in
discussion.
general, I think in general we have some math problems in terms of developing technology for high volume, low margin products, right? You know, as the market becomes more competitive, there's less margin in it for the manufacturers to invest. As policies change, as administrations change, there's less money for governmental support of these same programs. We do have a challenge here, and I'm not definitely not trying to say that I have all the answers to solving these problems, but we have some challenges that we need to kind of openly admit that we have, and then kind of work together to solve those problems. But the reality is, kind of we go back to what I said earlier about being a tech company or being a farm. Yeah, we need to find a way to finance both of those based on what each other sells. And that's going to mean that somebody who sells technology needs to look at the market that they're developing that technology for, and find a way to operate profitably based on the size of that market. That farmer needs to then take that technology that they're purchasing and make sure that it leads towards profitability of selling the produce that they're growing. And I know that those things are going to be mixed up at times, but in general, for most farms, it's important to look that way. And for most manufacturers as well.
Thanks, Chris. So linking to your answer to this question in the chat, thinking about both as the manufacturers of products that serve CEA facilities and the growers, operators of CEA facilities, what inputs would you flag as being at risk of disruption or increased costs if proposed tariffs do go into effect?
Ooh. And we're speaking as Americans.
I did promote this webinar as fairly U.S. focused, yeah, for today's
Okay,
discussion.
if we're speaking as Americans,
Yeah.
I'm going to go on a limb and say everything. Because if we look at, everything from organics to synthetics, many of the fertilizers we're using are being imported. If we look at the steel, much of the steel and aluminum we're using, a portion or all of it's being imported. If we look at seeds, a lot of the seeds are being imported. If we look at the growing media and the substrates, a lot of that's being imported. If you look at the manufacturing of the equipment that you're using, a lot of that's being imported. Not all of it, right? I'm being very general in my comments, but I'm going to say that there's going to be very few places where you can hide, where you're not reliant on part or all of what you're buying being imported at some level, right? You could have components that are not being tariffed as they're coming together to assemble a product, kind of like a car, right? We all need trucks to deliver stuff. But I can't remember the exact amount of times, but if you're buying a lot of cars that are made in Michigan or near Michigan, I think it's something like the vehicle passes the border 7 times before it gets completed, something like that. You're going to see an increase on all of those items because we as a nation many years ago really started to, really lean towards globalism. And when we talked about onshoring, we oftentimes didn't talk about onshoring into the United States, but onshoring into Canada or Mexico, and treating that as one area that was supporting the US consumer. And so I don't know of much of anything that you're going to be able to say isn't going to be impacted. But I also would say that it might not be impacted because the tariffs may not happen, or they might happen for 6 months and then go away. I'm not going to guess.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that thoughtful answer. I'm going to add a couple thoughts there with steel. I don't know if you're aware, but like there's very few steel manufacturers left in the United States, and one of the largest manufacturers, US Steel, is in the process of being sold to Nippon Steel.
Yeah.
And there's a large amount of uncertainty with whether Nippon Steel will be required to continue manufacturing steel in California in the way that has been in the past. So steel, I would mention, is also even if it's made in the US, could potentially be a bit of a wild card. And then energy, of course, I'll
Yeah.
mention, many folks may not import their energy, but some folks do. So, for example, I live in Vermont. Both my electricity powering my house, and if I was served by natural gas, the natural gas that would come to my house would be coming from Canada. So these are things that folks located close to the border may not be aware of, that the energy costs that in the energy tariffs could affect us even if you're not at the border.
And if you just look at the photo that's in front of us, right? Looking at that photo, there isn't one item that you can see. That the photo is taken from a greenhouse in the Midwest of the United States. And there is not one item that you can visually see that was manufactured in the United States. Everything was there was quite a bit of stuff that was sourced from North America, but there's not one item. There was some items that were assembled in the United States, but not manufactured, made, the made in the US. There's not one item in that photo. And that's from the glass to the floor poly.
And this isn't to say that there aren't US manufacturers of these systems. They are just not.
In this picture, no, there's not.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
why? I mean, that seems like a whole nother webinar, but like, why are there none of these products being made here?
Business, right? Like, I don't know a better way to say business capitalism, whatever you want to say.
Yeah. No.
If you just look at the accessible audience, right? And I take that back to what we were talking about from a technology play. The first thing you should do when you're building a tech company is to look at how big is the audience that I have to service, right? And if you look at the statistics globally about acres of greenhouses growing tomatoes around the world, the US isn't a leading producer of greenhouse tomatoes. So these companies are going to be based more in areas where there's more concentration, more acres, more hectares of businesses in a region. And then they're going to look at the lowest cost ways of manufacturing that. And that's not been in the US. Now, again, we can look at it from a North American perspective, and that changes. But specifically to the US, even in North America, the US is, and we'll again use tomatoes as an example, of the three, of US, Canada, Mexico, the United States is by far the smallest producer of greenhouse tomatoes, but we are the main consumer of greenhouse tomatoes.
Thanks for exploring this with me, Chris. We have a slightly adjusted question, and I'll move on to another topic after this one. But do you feel like any supplies that might just like be for general farming, like won't be affected by the tariffs, or will all things related to greenhouse production be caught up in this? I think the person was perhaps asking, like, even if it's just for farming, which may get carve-outs or exemptions.
I can't answer that. We have no
Yeah.
reason to believe that those exemptions are right now. I have not read, or nobody shared anything from Capitol Hill to me where it says that these exemptions are going to be put in place on day one.
Mhm.
Now, to say that there's not going to be carve-outs going forward, I don't know, right? Or to say that the rates are not going to be different for farm, I don't know. But as we sit here today, a couple of weeks after the time the first tariff was supposed to be applied, I don't have any knowledge of anything that's going to change for the farm.
Yep, I think that everyone has their best guess at this point.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about strategies and technologies that are worthwhile for growers to invest in this year to maximize value and minimize risk. One of the things you mentioned in a recent article was about making every day the same day. What's that strategy? Are there technologies associated with that?
Yeah, I've always believed that the reason to move inside when growing is, and again, I'm going to age myself when say this, but there was an old Bill Murray movie called Groundhog Day, and he went into this routine where every day he woke up and it was the day on repeat, and he got to try to make that day perfect, right? And he went through cycles about how he was going to do that. I kind of look at the greenhouses in the same way. The reason we're building the greenhouse is to create the ideal climate to grow produce. So in doing so, we want to wake up and make every day in the greenhouse or in the vertical farm or in the indoor farm essentially the same day that is ideal for that crop that we've elected to grow. Now, I look at things a little bit differently than what had been promoted in the past, is that same day is the tools that we need to create that ideal day differ based on where the farm is built, right? If I'm in an area that is a great climate, then I'm going to need less technology to make that perfect day because I'm going to have to amend the temperatures less. I'm going to have to amend the humidity less. I'm going to have to add less light because naturally speaking, I'm going to get a better climate just because of my location. Whereas if I go to a climate that is more severe, then I'm going to have to spend a lot more money amending those things. And again, if I'm looking to create the perfect day, I'm going to go to those 9 variables and say, what do I need to amend that variable to put me in an ideal range? If we're talking, again, because this is glaze, if we are talking about light, I'm going to look at my location. I'm going to look at my historical averages, how much light I receive on a monthly basis. I'm going to get a better understanding of, what are my utility costs. I'm going to have a better understanding of what my glazing looks like. And I'm going to make a decision based on those variables to build the right lighting plan for myself and invest in that lighting plan. Hopefully investing in something that is energy efficient as possible, because I know, actually, I was in another podcast where we talked about this. I believe the other interviewees did not believe that energy costs were going to continue to go up. Energy costs have always gone up in my lifetime. I don't know why that would stop. So I believe that we know that choosing the most energy efficient piece of equipment that's available to us today will continue to be better and better for us as we proceed on in time, because my assumption is that energy is becoming more valuable. It's driving a lot of other areas of industry that have deeper pockets than we do, and they will buy it before we will, and we will pay more for it. And so I just expect that energy will continue to go up over time, thereby wanting to buy the most energy efficient equipment.
I don't know why folks might think that energy costs would not continue to go up. I mean, I worked for an electric utility. Some things that folks may not realize is that most utilities go forward in most states. There's a public utility commission, and if there's not, there's some other sort of structure where utilities ask to raise their rates. In some cases, in some states, they might not have to ask anyone, but most times they raise their rates. They're called rate cases. And no one I've ever seen in a rate case is generally saying, let's charge less money next year. They're usually building out new facilities, so they need to pay for those new substations or upgrades to pipelines or building out new transmission or distribution lines to new customers. So an anecdote I'll share is if you haven't been monitoring Massachusetts natural gas prices. I wrote about this back in, I think in 2021 or something, where I said that the rate cases for Massachusetts are forecasting very high increases. And I thought that folks thinking about building in Massachusetts might want to know that. And so the rubber's hit the road now. Those rate cases were approved, and now those customers are paying those bills, and they are having 20 to 30% higher bills. And some of these folks who've maybe made a business plan with a certain energy cost in mind, and maybe you've done some payback period calculations, and you decided not to invest in efficiency because today's energy cost was low. I think that folks should really consider doing payback periods that reflect increasing cost of energy for future years. So thanks for letting me share that anecdote, because I think that's definitely a point that profitability, if you aren't planning for that increased cost in energy, all of your forecasts are just very rosy.
Yep.
Yeah. Encourage folks in the chat to add more questions. I just saw one come in here. Talking of energy, do you think the changed US administration's view on carbon fuels, fossil fuels, will affect energy costs and or desire to decarbonize, like electrify greenhouses and so on, if we could get CO2 economically and energy efficiency? I think that, Chris, I'm happy to take that stab first.
Yeah, I was going to say this is probably more your area of
Yeah.
expertise, and my only comment would be is that I'm watching the demand for electricity go up because of investors' interest in energy intensive technology. And I don't know how we would benefit that for that, but I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I think with increasing automation and, like you said, creating the perfect day, you ultimately have more equipment that uses energy, whether that's electricity, natural gas, or perhaps you're fueled by propane or some other sort of delivered fuel. With the new administration's view on fossil fuel, drilling more is probably going to happen. New leases will probably open up. More natural gas power plants will probably be built rather than phasing in more renewables. But you always need baseload energy. So I feel like we've still had a very fossil fuel heavy electric grid for some time because natural gas came in the 80s. In general, I think that energy costs are still going to rise even if we have more natural gas power plants come online. I think that renewables have in some cases increased the cost of electricity as they've been adopted, because they, like green power in general, requires a bit higher of an investment. So I think that potentially we could see folks maybe see natural gas prices become a more stable choice, and maybe they'll see electric costs in their region go up and they might choose to do more fossil fuel based heating systems rather than electrify. But that's a lot of conjecture. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Chris.
No, I don't even want to try to guess. I think if I were, depending on the size of farm that I was building and depending on the crop that I was trying to grow and depending on my business plan, I probably would approach the topic differently. I would probably be thinking again more like a farmer and trying to identify a climate that is going to be more suitable to me using less energy than trying to manage something that's much greater than agriculture, right? I would probably be saying, okay, does it make sense for me to build this farm in a hot, humid environment? And if the answer is yes, then I'm justifying that answer by I have a market that's willing to pay me a premium for being here. And I'm confident that that premium is going to last long enough to pay back my investment. And if the answer is yes, go for it. I'm 100% in support of that. But if my client is a national retailer and the cost of moving product by truck is less than, which it normally is, than heating and cooling that greenhouse in a non-hospitable environment, then I'm saying, okay, I need to look better at what property I'm electing to put this farm on.
Yep. I've been wanting to bring up the topic of site selection as a thing that I think that in 2025 will hopefully become a little bit more intelligent or strategic. I think that there's been a lot of intelligence applied to site selection for, like, what you've been mentioning of like trying to be near good metropolitan markets. But as the energy bills come in, I'm not sure some of those sites were necessarily the smartest in that energy dimension. So I appreciate you mentioning when we were planning for this webinar, like, if CEA isn't a differentiating factor, why do it? Because the costs per acre are so much like exponentially higher than field farming. And if you add a little trucking on top of that field farming cost, it will still be nowhere near that. What did you say, $2 to $5 million an acre for a greenhouse?
For leafy greens, yeah.
For
And every crop is going to be different, but for leafy greens, I would say that's what most people have been investing versus tens of $1,000s per acre for field grown.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like field farmers have been stagnant, right? They have been increasing their yields per acre every year as well. So it's not like they're just stagnant, not investing in technology. They're just investing in different types of technology. So yeah, I think the size of the farm really could dictate that. If you had a mid to small size farm that had a captive local audience, then yeah, you're going to want to stay local. But if you build a farm that's so large that you become a regional supplier, because you outgrew for the local retailers and you're now shipping multi-states away, then I think you have to really investigate what the value is of building your farm there.
Yeah, I think that some things that we've been discussing here are, energy costs due to the climate and location, but also labor access, bringing in something that we were talking about before as another dimension. It can allow you to choose your technology. Maybe you need a little more automation because labor access isn't very good, but in general, I guess to bring it to the question we had at the beginning of what strategies and technologies are worthwhile. I think that if folks are looking for some sort of like silver bullet of, okay, like this much automation, right? Or this much labor. I guess I'll just leave it to you to maybe have a final takeaway on that topic. Like, what is really worthwhile to invest in to minimize risk in 2025?
Yeah, there is no silver bullet. There is not an answer that is a silver bullet. I'm very confident in that. It is very much a case by case situation. And I look at it as the crop you're growing, your access to natural resources, your geographic location. Each one of those things is going to start to lead you in the path to know what you should invest in, right? As an example, if I'm building a farm if I'm building a farm to grow leafy greens, and I'm going to stay small, right? And I want to service a niche market. The farm that I build in an area north of Los Angeles is probably going to be a pretty low tech farm because the climate is so ideal. My investment strategy is going to be more on my marketing to make sure that, because I'm small, to make sure that I've carved out a niche for myself that makes me growing locally a differentiator that allows me to have something in the neighborhood of 20% premium over my competition. Because I think most consumers will give you 20% more easily if they think that there's value in the product that you're providing. Now, the further you go up over that 20%, that's your business plan. And I'm not going to say you're right or wrong, but I think it becomes more challenging. If I do the same thing and I'm building in, let's say, northern Quebec, right? The furthest thing from LA to northern Quebec. Then all of a sudden I'm thinking about, okay, what is my biggest opportunity? My biggest opportunity is to have fresh produce the winter 6 months of the year, because at that point in time, I don't have any field competition. So I need to make sure that my investment in my facility is going to allow me to grow profitably for those 6 months of the year when I'm going to consume a lot of energy, right? I need to light it almost 100%. I need to heat and cool it 100%. I can't rely on any help from Mother Nature. And that's where I'm making the investment in tech. I'm teaming up with a great HVAC specialist. I'm teaming up with suppliers that I can rely on that are going to be able to help me over the next 5 to 10 years as I continue to battle for that market. And then I'm going to, work on my unit economics and try to make sure that I'm managing those costs best way possible. But my decision-making process that I made in Oxnard, California versus the one I'm making in Moncton, Canada, they're so vastly different.
And I think that that brings us to a little bit of something that we've seen in the past few years of just like a lot of the technology is, as we were talking earlier today, manufactured somewhere else and often is designed somewhere else and is maybe designed for a particular climate because it's been practiced in one of those larger markets, right? And so when it comes to the US with our very diverse climate zones from marine to humid to dry to cold to hot, sweltering, I think that that sometimes is where we also can see the technology isn't also going to be necessarily perfectly applicable just when you throw it in.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So if there's any more questions, please share them from the chat. We appreciate the ones that have come in so far. I'm going to close with a question that's a bit about that opportunities for the future part of our talk today. In one of your recent articles, you talked about leadership and like, what do we want our leaders to do? Why are they leading? What are they leading? What do we expect the outcome to be? So, will you share with us a thought on like how businesses can lead by example in your thoughts for this year?
Yeah, I'll try to, because I'm not so sure I'm one that believes that businesses are necessarily the best leaders, right? Businesses should, businesses, we know what they're there for, right? I'm a small business owner. I know the purpose for my business. My purpose is to find a way to generate profit so that I can successfully employ my employees and provide them proper benefits so that they all have good lives and my clients are happy with the products and services that we're offering. And I need to turn a profit to do so in order to continue to do that on a monthly and an annual basis. So that's my motive in running my business. Now, it's not that strong business people can't be good leaders, but it's oftentimes easy to confuse those two motives. And so it may be that our strongest leaders are not businesses, or it may be that they are. But I think we need to do a better job of questioning why they're there, right? We need to do a better job as the industry is saying, yeah, we know why we're promoting that guy and we're getting behind that guy or gal, right? We know why we're doing this. And and I think the right leaders eventually rise to the top. Um, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a business. In fact, I'm kind of one that believes that it's only once in a great while that the best leaders are business guys.
Yeah, I think we might be seeing that going on right now. Um, um, appreciate that response. We got two new questions from the chat that we'll
Yeah.
close out with. One of them is touching on, this is a long, probably a very long answer, but I'm sure you can answer it fairly quickly. Why does Canada have such a more developed greenhouse industry than the US if they've got such a like harsher climate?
Yeah, I think it's the simple way was time and need, right? They developed in a climate that, in comparison to the rest of Canada, is fairly mild. And when I'm saying, I'm talking about Southern Ontario, right? If you look at snowfall, Southern Ontario gets a lot less snow. You had an immigrant community that was there that was already growing field-grown tomatoes, and that community came into some hardships where the client that they were mostly servicing went away. Let's just say they went away. And in order for them to continue to operate their businesses, they had to find a new way to grow successfully. And one of the things that they brought over from Europe was greenhouse technology. And so that consolidation, that community that was created allowed them all to work together because a lot of them are related, either cousins, brothers, aunts, uncles. A lot of them are related, that community then built and built and built upon itself. Um, if we look at it today, I've actually been pretty vocal about this. There's two things that they have that we don't have in the United States. And one of those is they have a much better worker visa program than what we have access to in the US. They have a program that is suitable to 12-month-a-year greenhouse production. In the United States, our agricultural worker visa program is more hasn't been amended in a way to actually work in favor of the greenhouses. And the second part is that we also have a situation where they can play the advantage of a currency, right? They're operating in a currency that is lower value than the currency they're selling in. So they grow in a currency that's lower and sell in a higher currency and can store the money where they need to take advantage of those currency losses and gains. And I think those two things today are bigger advantages than what they were 30 or 40 years ago when they started. But they started out of need. And then I'm a big proponent of not online community, but physical communities, because I do believe that if we look at art, if we look at education, if we look at all of these things where we have clusters, a lot of that came from having like-minded individuals in a similar area that work together to prop the whole thing up. Now, it's a highly competitive region. Don't get me wrong, but it's also a competitive region that has each other's back. So it's kind of that old brothers things. The brothers can fight, but an outsider is not allowed to fight with the brother.
Right. Yeah. Two things to add to what you shared there. If you aren't aware of where the Leamington area is on a map, do take a look at a great portion of it is actually south of the latitudes of many parts of the northern US. So essentially it's dipping below our northern border and getting as much sunshine as some of our northern states. So if you haven't kind of thought about that, that's the hot spot Chris is talking about. And then the community of immigrants and ingenuity that you were talking about in Leamington reminded me a bit of like Kennett Township in Pennsylvania for the mushroom community here in the US. Same sort of thing has happened for the US mushroom industry. There was a need and there was a concentrated group of people who had this knowledge and brought it to the US and injected.
And we have plenty of those concentrations, right, around the
Yeah.
United States in agriculture. Anybody who's
Floriculture has
gone,
its own as well. Yep.
yeah, you know, anybody who's spent time traveling commercial ag and hort, we go around and we see these concentrations of areas that have built up. And I mean, you go to Salinas, California, and you talk about
That's the other one I was about to mention. Carpinteria, Salinas, Santa Barbara.
powerhouses in terms of production. These guys are really good at what they do, right? Homestead, Florida, in nursery production for flower crops. You know, McMinnville, Tennessee, in tree nursery production. Like I can tell you these things around. It's just so happens that, you know, greenhouse tomatoes, there was a big head start in Leamington, Kingsville, Essex County, Ontario.
Yeah, I really appreciate talking about this sort of history and helps fill in the gaps for some folks who might be new to the industry. And speaking of folks new to the industry, I'll finish with this question. Do you have any thoughts on how we can get young people excited about training for CEA careers and attract new talent to sustain the industry's future?
This is something I've thought about a lot because I think when we were in that period of industry development where it was a lot of aspirational dreams that we were kind of marketing to everybody, I think it was pretty easy to attract young people to the space. Now we're in this position of where we have to run these farms and it's a lot of monotony, right? That's the hardest thing that I've had to deal with is explain to people, like my idea of Groundhog Day. It's not always so exciting getting up and just doing the same thing every day, but that monotony is what makes farmers successful. And so I don't have a good answer to that question. I think I do believe though that if we're truthful to what the industry offers, I think if we're truthful to what it's needed to be successful in this industry, that we will attract people that lifestyle fits. And it doesn't fit for everybody. And I think that we went through that wave of everybody thinking that they were solving global problems every day. And now what they have to realize is they're doing a lot of the same thing every day, which can be fulfilling to the right individuals.
Yeah, I would say that we're working on at GLASE a youth in ag tech workforce development project. And I'll also mention, I think that personality types is something that can also be used. I've taken something called the DISC profile, and in the engineering community, a lot of engineers end up in this one quadrant of the DISC profile, and it's folks who are very steadfast and conscientious, and they're okay with repeated processes. That's kind of what makes them feel comfortable. And so it, like, to me, signifies that perhaps we need to be communicating that there are these career opportunities for folks who are interested in a process, not necessarily an adventure every day. But yeah.
And I think, you know, closing in on that, because there was one thing I missed in that is I do think business owners, investors, we need to be able to prove that we can do this successfully so that young people who are looking for a solid foundation where they can build a long career don't see it as volatile as they might today, right? Because I've spoken to a lot of people that came into the industry really excited, and now they're in their early 30s after the last 10 years, and they don't want anything to do with the industry. That's on that in large part, that's on us as business owners. That's on us for not creating the environment that was sustainable, for taking too many risks, and for not creating strong businesses that can build good careers. And if we're able to address that, then I think we will attract those people that meet the profile, Gretchen, that you just described.
Thanks, Chris, for those thoughts and for a really great discussion, and for our attendees for some thoughtful questions. We appreciate having you, Hort Americas, chatting with us in our first webinar for 2025, and look forward to seeing everyone at our next one. Thanks, everybody.